Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7. My name is Sheldon Chambers and I apologise for being a couple of minutes behind. We are going to start with our Ukrainian update. A Russian warship in the Black Sea, the Sergei Kotov, was sunk by Ukrainian Special Forces, Ukraine's Defence Intelligence Directorate announced this morning. On the night of March the 4th to the 5th, 2024, the special unit of the GUR of the Ministry of Defence of Ukraine's Group 13 was attacked the patrol ship of the Black Sea Fleet of the Russian Federation, Sergei Kotov. As a result of the attack by the Magura V-5 naval drones, the Russian ship of Project 22160 Sergei suffered damage to the stern, right and left sides. The Kotova was damaged by a fire in the territorial waters of Ukraine, near the Kerch Strait. The cost of the sunken ship is about $65 million. The claim from Ukraine came after Kerch Bridge from Russia to illegally occupied Crimea was reportedly closed to traffic overnight and explosions were reported in the area. Social media channels suggested Ukrainian aerial and/or naval drone attacks had taken place. The announcement by Ukrainian intelligence appears to confirm events. Russia launched 22 attack drones against Ukraine, with air defense systems destroying 18 of them over the Odessa region, Ukraine's Air Force said on Tuesday morning. Ukraine's military said it contained a Russian advance outside Avdiivka, the city captured last month, but Russian troops were regrouping further south around Novomykhailivka. Ukraine's emergency services reported that 2 firefighters were killed near the eastern Ukrainian town of Kramatorsk, north of Avdiivka, when they came under Russian shelling at the scene of a fire. The UK has urged Germany to supply long-range Taurus missiles to the Ukrainian military despite an embarrassing leak to Russian television of a top-secret call involving German Air Force officers. A 38-minute recording was released on Friday by the Kremlin propagandist Margarita Simonian, editor-in-chief of TV network RT. The Taurus missiles, which have a 300-mile range, twice that of the Anglo-French Storm Shadow Scalp weapons system already given to Kyiv. Ukraine's military intelligence agency launched a cyber attack against the servers of the Russian Defense Ministry and said it gained access to a bulk of classified service documents. David Franklin Slater, 63, a civilian U.S. Air Force employee, has been charged in Nebraska with transmitting classified information about Russia's war with Ukraine on a foreign online dating platform, according to the U.S. Justice Department. The European Commission is proposing how the EU can boost its arms industry and shift to war economy mode. Terry Brenton, the European Industry Commissioner, will lay out proposals to encourage EU countries to buy more weapons together from European companies, and to help such firms increase production capacity, according to EU officials. Brenton, a French former tech company CEO, has said the possibility of another US presidential term for Donald Trump, who has undermined and threatened to quit NATO, means Europe has to do more to protect itself. Britain's package is expected to include about €1.5 billion in a new money through the end of 2027. Brenton has called for special EU funds of €100 billion for defence projects. Ukraine's defence minister, Rustem Umerov, said he and Alexandre Syrsky, the armed force commander, discussed the frontline situation and supply of weapons with the US Defence Secretary Lloyd Austin on Monday. Looking to the Middle East, at least 30,631 Palestinians have been killed and 72,043 injured in Israeli strikes on Gaza since the 7th of October. The Gaza Health Ministry said an estimated 97 Palestinian people were killed and 123 injured in the past 24 hours, the ministry added. Negotiations aimed at brokering a ceasefire in Israel's war in Gaza appeared to have stalled days before an unofficial deadline of the beginning of Ramadan. Hamas negotiators stayed in Cairo for a third day of ceasefire talks today after 2 days yielded no breakthrough. 2 days of talks between Hamas and the international mediators broke in the Egyptian capital without any significant breakthroughs, Palestinian officials said after Israel declined to send a delegation to the latest rounds of negotiations. But leaders from Hamas were reportedly expected to hold more talks in Cairo with Egyptian and Qatari mediators over the prospects of reaching a ceasefire deal. Israel's defense minister, Yoav Gallant, has said the continuing tension with Hezbollah militants at the border with Lebanon was moving the situation nearer to a military escalation. Reuters reported, "We are committed to the diplomatic process. However, Hezbollah's aggression in bringing us closer to a critical point in decision-making regarding our military activities in Lebanon," he said in a statement after a meeting with the U.S. Special Envoy Amos Hochstein. NBC News has been told by U.S. officials that Kamala Harris's speech on Sunday, in which the U.S. Vice President called for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza and urged Hamas to accept a deal to release hostages in return for a 6-week cessation of hostilities, was watered down by officials at the National Security Council. Children are dying of starvation in northern Gaza, the World Health Organization chief Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus has said. In a post on X, he said the organization's visit over the weekend to Al-Awada and Kamal Adwan hospitals in northern Gaza were the first since early October and produced grim findings. The WHO chief described severe levels of malnutrition, children dying of starvation, and serious shortages of fuel, food, and medical supplies at the health facilities. Adding to concerns about the widespread malnutrition in the enclave, Richard Peppercorn, WHO representative for Gaza and the West Bank, said today that the situation is particularly extreme in northern Gaza. He said that 1 in 6 children under 2 years of age were acutely malnourished in northern Gaza. In Geneva, Jens Larky, spokesperson for the UN humanitarian agency, told reporters, "With children starting to die from starvation, that should be an alarm like no other." Turning to Scotland, First Minister and Justice Secretary's meeting with Emma Caldwell's family. The First Minister and Justice Secretary Angela Constance have met with Emma Caldwell's mother Margaret today. Following the meeting with Margaret Caldwell and her family and legal representative, Justice Secretary Angela Constance said, "The First Minister and I would like to thank Margaret Caldwell and her family for meeting with us today. We were able to pass on our deepest condolences directly to Margaret and express how sorry we are for the loss of her beloved daughter Emma and for the long wait for justice the family and other women affected by these horrific cases have had. There is no doubt they were let down, so it is right that the police Scotland has apologised for the failures of the original investigation." The First Minister and I discussed Margaret's call for a judge-led public inquiry, and as the First Minister made clear last week, we are very open to this. We are also clear that we want to meet with Emma's family and hear their views directly before making any decisions. We will now seriously reflect on today's discussion and give the family's call for a judge-led public inquiry primary consideration as we consider next steps. We have told the family we will take a quick decision and inform Parliament when we do so. The Scottish Government has noted that there is a 14-day period following the conclusions of a criminal trial during which it is possible to lodge an intent to appeal, which may impact the timing of any announcement. Following the conviction of Emma Caldwell's murderer last week, Police Scotland have announced that they are re-examining several unsolved murders of women in Glasgow between 1991 and 1998. Speculations that the Chancellor will cut national insurance by 2p in tomorrow's spring budget. It is widely expected that that we'll use the spring budget on Wednesday to cut national insurance by a further 2p. The Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, has been given £13 billion headroom by the Office for Budget of Responsibility, which he is widely expected to use to cut national insurance by a further 2p in the spring budget on Wednesday. In the autumn budget last year, the Chancellor lowered the national insurance tax by 2p from 12% to 10%, which came into effect in January. Overall, the tax cuts to national insurance is expected to save the average earner £900 a year. However, it is believed that the public spending will also need to see cuts if planned tax cuts go ahead. This is despite warning by economists that public services will buckle if cuts were to take place. The SNP has called for the Chancellor to use the headroom to deliver a £15 billion NHS funding boost, as the IFS warns the NHS faces the biggest real-term cuts since the 1970s. They have called for the Jeremy Hunt to boost NHS spending by £15 billion, turbocharge investment in green energy, help families with cost of living, boost public finances. Commenting, SNP Westminster leader Stephen Flynn MP said, "It's increasingly clear that the future of the NHS is at stake. The SNP is the only part of the party standing up for our NHS by demanding funding it needs. The UK government has already slashed Scotland's budget, and now the Tory Chancellor is cutting public services to the bone. It has to stop." The SNP message to the Chancellor ahead of the UK budget is clear. Don't take the axe to our NHS. Instead of imposing cuts, Jeremy Hunt should be investing to improve public services, help families with the cost of living, and boost economic growth. The SNP is calling on the Chancellor to use the available headroom to deliver a £15 billion funding boost for the NHS and tax the super rich to deliver the £400 annual energy bill discount for households. And instead of cutting capital investment, the SNP is challenging the Chancellor to go for a growth by investing at least £28 billion in green energy, gold rush, and rejoining the EU single market. The Tories trashed the economy, and neither Rishi Sunak nor Keir Starmer have a credible plan. Instead, they are ushering in another decade of austerity cuts with their economically illiterate fiscal rules. Unlike Sunak and Starmer, the SNP will always stand up for Scotland's values and demand the best deal for the Scottish families. The UK spends the least on low-carbon energy policies among major European economies. The UK spends less than other major European economies on low-carbon energy policy, according to analysis by Greenpeace. This is despite evidence that such spending could lower household bills and increase economic growth more than the planned tax cuts expected in tomorrow's budget. The analysis collected data from the International Energy Agency and showed that the UK spent $33.3 billion or £26.6 billion from April 2020 to the end of April 2023. This is compared with Italy, which spent $111 billion, Germany, which spent $92.7 billion, France, $64.5 billion, and Spain, which spent around $51.3 billion. The data highlighted spending by economies on electricity networks, energy efficiency, fuel and technology innovation, and efficient low-carbon transport and low-carbon electricity. It is expected that the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, will aim to introduce some type of tax cut in the last budget of this Parliament, while expecting to devote little to energy or green policies. However, a growing body of evidence backed up by expert opinions suggests that the UK's low-growth, low-productivity economy needs government spending on green issues. A study by London School of Economics earlier this year found that an investment of £26 billion a year on low-carbon economy would boost the economy more than tax cuts, attracting in twice the additional private sector investment and reduce household bills. Bob Ward, the Policy and Communications Director at the Grantham Research Institute on Climate Change and the Environment at the London School of Economics and Political Science, said, "There is now very clear evidence that the UK has been investing much less than its competitors across a range of areas, including on tackling climate change, biodiversity loss, and environmental degradation. This low investment explains why productivity has stagnated in the UK and growth has been so feeble. It also explains why our homes and businesses are vulnerable to climate change impacts. Our countryside and seas are becoming depleted of any wildlife, our cities have dirty air, and our rivers and beaches are covered in sewage." The SNP Energy and Net Zero spokesperson, Dave Dugan, MP, said Scotland has the potential to be a European green energy economic powerhouse, but that it is being threatened by Westminster's refusal to invest in renewables. "We have an enormous expertise and infrastructure that is already showing what we can achieve with proper backing, but that government investment has come to allow Scotland to realise its unique green growth opportunities." Talk TV to close down television channel and go online only. The right-wing news channel Talk TV, launched in 2022 by Rupert Murdoch's News UK, is to stop broadcasting on television after struggling to match its main rival, GB News, for ratings. Talk TV will now switch to online platforms only from this summer, an email to staff announced on Tuesday. Last month, its best-known presenter, Piers Morgan, said he would be leaving his daily evening show. The channel got off to a disappointing start with 0 viewers during primetime broadcasts, meaning its audience was too small to register as an official rating agency, Barb. In December 2023, it reached 2 million viewers, significantly behind its rival GB News on 2.87 million, and little challenge to the dominance of Sky News on 8.5 million and the market leader BBC News at 11.4 million for the month. The move will be seen as a boost to GB News despite its rising financial losses. On Tuesday, GB News said its pre-tax loss had gone from 30.7 million in a year to the end of May 2022 to 42.4 million a year later. Last year, GB News received 41 million from its parent company, taking the total it owes to 83.8 million. Talk TV and GB News have faced investigations over media regulator Ofcom over complaints about impartiality breaches by presenters. Scott Taunton, Talk TV's president of broadcasting, in an email to staff presented the move as a reflection of audience preferences for online viewing. It said, 2 years ago we would not have been brave enough to launch a channel without a linear presence. But audiences of all ages have moved fast, and smartphones are now the primary device where news is consumed. We need to adapt to this as the priority. We are therefore intending that talks come off linear television from early summer, and our focus will be on streaming. Taunton said that a large proportion of our live viewing is already through streaming on television, and we intend to continue to grow this. Linda Graham, the founder of Broadcasting Scotland, commented, "I am always amazed how easy it is for millions of pounds to be pumped in to cover the losses of right-wing broadcasters, and yet an independent Scottish broadcaster, which is firmly rooted in the principles of public service broadcasting, struggling to find the financial support to pay off our bills and employ staff. More than ever, we depend on our grassroots supporters. Without their support, we would not exist." Single parents on benefits are being punished by the UK government policy. Single parents feel they are being punished by the government's new unrealistic policy, which could see them have their benefits docked if they do not work up to 30 hours a week once their youngest child turns 3, double that of the prior requirement of 16 hours. A survey of 638 single parents conducted by the Single Parent Rights Campaign Group and supported by Save the Children found that 81% of respondents felt that working near full-time hours was unmanageable and that would have negative impact on them and their children. The research also highlighted the obstacles parents face when working, including a lack of childcare, flexible work, and single-parent employment discrimination. Becca Leon, the head of UK child poverty at Save the Children, said, "It's clear parents can't meet the new conditionality requirements, which are unrealistic and not bedded in the realities of everyday life. The whole policy needs an urgent rethink." A spokesperson for the Department for Work and Pensions said it has boosted support for parents on universal credit by almost 50%, as well as giving more help to parents of children aged between 1 and 3. Not all parents of children over 3 are expected to work the maximum 30 hours a week, and parents can talk about their circumstances with a work coach to make sure help is tailored to their unique situation. Scotland introduced the Scottish Child Payment Scheme in 2021, which provides families with £25 a week for children under the age of 16 to help combat the extra cost of raising a child. World Bank report says no equality for working women in any country in the world. A news report from the World Bank has said that no country in the world affords women the same opportunities as men in the workforce. The report found that the global gender gap was far wider than previously thought. However, closing the gap could raise global gross domestic product by more than 20%. For the first time, the bank investigated the impact of childcare and safety policies on women's participation in the labour market in 190 countries. It found that when 2 factors were taken into account, women on average enjoyed just 64% of the legal protections men do, down from the previous estimate of 77%. Report author T. Tumbrick said childcare and safety issues particularly affected women's ability to work. Violence could physically prevent them from going to work, and childcare costs could make it prohibitive. The 10th edition of Women's Business and the Law report, published on Monday, also assessed the gap between law and policies put in place to implement them for the first time. It found countries had, on average, established less than 40% of the systems needed for full implementation. While 95 countries enacted laws on equal pay, only 35 had measures in place to ensure the pay gap was addressed. Globally, women earned just 77 cents of each dollar earned by men. Many sub-Saharan African countries had seen rapid progress in the reform of laws in recent years, said the study, but had the largest gap between legislation and implementation. Togo had the highest number of laws in sub-Saharan Africa, giving women 77% of the legal rights of men, but had structures in place to implement just a quarter of them. Addressing the childcare gap would immediately lead to 1% increase in women's participation in the workforce. The report said less than half of the countries had financial support or tax relief for parents of young children, and less than a third had quality standards in place for childcare that could assure parents of their children's safety. In 81 countries, a woman's pension benefits do not account for periods of work absent related to childcare. The report said that while 151 countries had laws against sexual harassment in the workplace, only 40 had laws that covered abuse in public areas or on public transport, meaning women were not protected on their way to work. In the US, 16 states head to the polls on Super Tuesday. The polls are open and voting is underway in some states as millions head to the ballot box on Super Tuesday, the largest day for voting for both the Democrats and the Republicans before the November presidential election. People are already casting their ballots in person in eastern states including Virginia, North Carolina, Maine, and others. Also further Midwest in Minnesota, and polls will be opening soon in places such as Colorado, then further west later. Voters involved today are in Alabama, Alaska, Arkansas, California, Colorado, Iowa, Maine, Massachusetts, Minnesota, North Carolina, Oklahoma, Tennessee, Texas, Utah, Vermont, and Virginia. The territory of American Samoa will be caucusing. In Iowa, where Democratic caucuses were held by mail since January, the results are expected this evening. Results will roll in throughout the evening. Taylor Swift has urged her supporters to head to the polls today in a rare political message on Instagram. Today, March 5th, is the presidential primary in Tennessee and 16 other states and territories, Swift wrote in an Instagram story. I wanted to remind you guys to vote the people who most represent you into power. If you haven't already, make plan to vote today. Whether you're in Tennessee or somewhere else in the US, check your polling places and times. Swift has not publicly endorsed a presidential candidate this cycle, but she previously backed Joe Biden in 2020 and supported Democratic candidates in Tennessee. In Holyrood, debates take place about Scotland's place in the world. Following the publication of the latest paper in the Building a New Scotland series yesterday, the Scottish Parliament today debated Scotland's place in the world, which focuses on international engagement in an independent Scotland. The debate, led by the Scottish Government's External Affairs Secretary Angus Robertson, MSP, discussed the proposals for how an outward-looking independent Scotland could play its part in tackling global challenges, setting out the Scottish Government's policy proposals for international engagement and defence policies following independence. These include commitments to apply for membership of the United Nations, European Union and NATO as soon as possible following a vote for independence, the establishment of a dedicated diplomatic network to promote and protect Scottish interests, provide consular support for Scottish citizens, and promote the country as a hub for innovation, trade and investment. A commitment to meet the UN's target of 0.7% gross national income on overseas development aid to help the world's poorest countries, the establishment of new armed forces informed by expert-led defence and security review, with a modern contract for personnel and continued strong support for veterans, the removal of nuclear weapons from Scotland in the safest and quickest manner possible after independence. Mr. Robinson said, Scotland is already making contribution on the world stage where we can to address global poverty, the climate and biodiversity crises, and threats to human rights. But because we are not independent, Scotland has been forced into Brexit and contributing towards billions of pounds being spent on nuclear weapons. If Scotland had full participation in multilateral bodies such as the UN, we can ensure our voice is heard on critical global issues such as on the Israel-Gaza conflict. Full representation within associations like the UN and the EU would also enable us to negotiate directly to become party to the internal treaties, conventions and agreements that reflect Scotland's values and ambitions as good global citizens. At decision time, opposition amendments by the Conservatives and Labour were defeated, and the motion was passed by 67 votes for yes to 53 votes for no. Emma Harper, MSP, leads the debate on eating disorders in Holyrood. In Holyrood today, Emma Harper, MSP, has led to a debate on Eating Disorder Awareness Week, specifically highlighting the challenges faced by those suffering from avoidant/restrictive food intake disorder, RFID, from the 26th of February to the 3rd of March this year. Third sector organisations, along with those affected by eating disorders and their families, came together to highlight the impact of eating disorders, which afflict 1 in 50 people across the UK and take more lives than any other mental health condition. The theme for 2024 was ARFID, which was largely unknown condition characterized avoiding certain foods or types of foods, with a person restricting intake in terms of overall amount eaten, or both. Beliefs about weight and shape do not contribute to this condition, but the lack of understanding and awareness of it can make treatment difficult to access. Speaking ahead of the debate, SNP MSP Emma Harper said, "For too long, eating disorders have been a silent killer. Their victims suffer in silence and shame as a result of stigma and misunderstanding. Such outdated approaches and attitudes have been dispelled for most parts, but there is still work to do. In particular, conditions like ARFID too often go untreated, misdiagnosed and overlooked. To do so is to let down those suffering from this condition and their families, and this cannot continue. That is why the work of third sector organisations like Beat Eating Disorders, as well as the significant funding from the Scottish Government, 120 million for mental health fund recovery and renewal funds in 2022, is so important. Ms Harper urged MSPs from all parties can come together in support of this work and raise awareness of the support available to those struggling right now. Glasgow University research aims to ensure future AI healthcare systems are free of gender bias. Glasgow University researchers are setting out to help ensure that the artificial intelligence behind the healthcare monitoring systems of the future is capable of providing the best possible care for both men and women. Recent advances in radar sensing technology could underpin a new generation of vital sign monitoring, experts say. A number of AI-enhanced vital sign monitoring systems, including the University of Glasgow's £5.5 million healthcare quest, are currently in development. The projects are exploring the potential of cutting-edge sensors to make track of the delicate rhythms of patients' hearts and lungs without requiring them to wear monitoring devices or be tracked on video camera. These less invasive vital sign monitoring systems will be supported by artificial intelligence technology. The AI will support the signs of an unexpected change in heart rate or respiration. If it decides medical intervention is required, it can send an alert out for help. The technology could help vulnerable groups like older people live more independently at home or in assisted accommodation. It could provide additional insight into the well-being of patients staying in hospital wards. A critically important consideration for any future radar-based health monitoring system is ensuring that its artificial intelligence component is properly trained and equally capable of making the correct judgments without bias towards one gender of patients. A team from the University of Glasgow's James Watt School of Engineering have won a new funding for a project to help that will examine the potential for gender bias in healthcare AI and find ways to ensure that AI-supported treatment remains equitable. Dr. Noor Gardban, a research fellow in electronic and nanoscale engineering at the University of Glasgow, is the project's principal investigator. She said, new sensors linked with artificial intelligence could offer potentially transformational opportunities to improve the way that we monitor patient well-being. Dr. Gadban warned of the risk that all kinds of human biases across race, class, gender, and more can be unwittingly incorporated into AI decision-making tools if proper care isn't taken when they are being trained on real-world data. Over the course of the next 18 months, we will work to develop a new framework to balance gender-related behaviour in AI monitoring systems. The research team will collect healthcare data from 30 males and 30 female study volunteers using radar sensors. The data will be used to train a newly developed AI architecture which will analyse the results of the radar monitoring. Separate models will be trained on the male and female data, comparing performances and highlighting any biases in the AI's performance. which can be adjusted for using statistical models and mitigation techniques. Project supervisor Dr. Julian Lerkernek from the James Watt School of Engineering said, "By the end of our research, we expect to have created a robust demonstration of how gender balance can be embedded in the heart of any future AI healthcare monitoring system." Well, this is it for this evening. Before I go, I want to remind you that Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. Our programme will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. We have now reached our emergency crowdfunding target of £10,000. So to everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make this a regular monthly payment, thank you very much. Our focus can now move on to securing the future of independent broadcasting for Scotland by growing our regular subscriber base and funding. Thank you again and goodbye.